In the personal story segment tonight, it's been a traumatic week for race relations in our country. There seems to be a stark divide between how blacks and whites see the decision by the grand jury not to indict Officer Wilson in the shooting death of Michael Brown. But things have been deteriorating for years now. For example, 5 years ago, 76% of blacks surveyed in a Pew Research poll said blacks and whites got along very well or pretty well. This year, that number dropped 12 percentage points to 64%. Now, for whites, the number dropped from 80% to 75%. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. to discuss Ferguson's impact on race relations is Hillary Shelton of the NAACP. Hillary Shelton, one of the things that strikes me right off the bat is the NAACP really has not been a player in Ferguson in terms of trying to tamp down the violence. And I'm wondering, where was the NAACP?
Well, I'm glad you're asking that question, because the answer that you've given is not quite true, Juan. The NAACP has been on the ground since day one in Ferguson. As a matter of fact, our brand new president and CEO, Mr. Carnell William Brooks, went to Ferguson the day after the violence began to make sure that there was a presence there. But keep in mind, NAACP members live in Ferguson.
Hillary,
and we live in St. Louis, and we live in Missouri.
You said day after. I'm saying, why wasn't the NAACP? I've written this. Where was Al Sharpton? Where was Jesse Jackson? Where's NAACP to stop the kind of violence we saw this week? To say that's not helpful to black folks.
Well, of course we did, and we were there. When I say day after, the minute we knew there was a problem, our new president and CEO was on the plane and on the ground. The NAACP has membership units in St. Louis County, of which Ferguson is a part. We have membership units in St. Louis City, which is, of course, Ferguson is a suburb thereof. And our state conference of the NAACP is also statewide throughout Missouri. We have been on the ground. We have been working with people on the ground to try to stop any kind of violence.
All right, so let me ask you a question.
Directly with police departments and the Department of Justice. From the very beginning.
Wait, hold on, though. I read a statement put out by the NAACP. It says, Governor Nixon was wrong to declare a state of emergency. It said protest is part of the American tradition. What's he trying to do? That the sight of the National Guard and the state of emergency declaration, in fact, might create a problem. But then on the other hand, Hillary, what we see is when the National Guard wasn't there, Ferguson burned.
Well, let me say the National Guard was there. Let me also say the biggest concern is making sure that that First Amendment right of freedom of speech is able to be exercised on the ground in Ferguson, a place that needed it more than any place else, ground central for all the violence that began. Those conversations needed to happen.
But how can you blame the governor for declaring a state of emergency and then not understand that that would have some consequence for the people?
I think it's important you understand what a state of emergency means. It means to actually end up suspending those civil rights for Americans to actually be able to participate and actually raise their voices and talk about the concerns they have in Ferguson and other places. In essence, we want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to say what's on their minds and actually participate in peaceful protests.
Okay, now, Hillary, I've also heard that you condemn the prosecutor, Bob McCullough, in the case. You think that the grand jury process was rigged, that he put so much information out there for the grand jurors that he essentially confused them and intended in their confusion to avoid an indictment for the police officer.
Let me say, for someone who's been a prosecutor for decades, to actually behave the way he did in this case raised major concerns and actually fed concerns we had early on. The NAACP called for Mr. McCullough to be recused early in the process. We asked for a special prosecutor to come in from day one. We recognize his background, that he comes from a big family of police.
All right.
His uncle, his brother, and his father was actually killed by an African American.
Everybody knows that,
His behavior had been established over the years has been one contemptuous to African Americans and other perpetrators.
But
so
Hillary,
in essence, we wanted to solve the problem before it began.
I have a quick question for you. Do you think that Officer Wilson, in what he has said, both in the grand jury and now, should be found free of indictment, or do you have some problem with the things that he said?
I have major problems with the things that he said. Quite frankly, the only thing more outrageous than what we've read in that transcript was the interview he did with George Stephanopoulos, where he referred to, in his mind, Mr. Michael Brown as some kind of demon. He described his behavior in animalistic terms that reminded me very much with the breath coming out of his nose. He said when he looked in his face, he saw a blankness that I would describe as what we talk about when we think about sharks in the water. In essence, what he did is dehumanized Michael Brown to a point that made it okay for him to actually kill him, as he did.
Well, I think he felt that he was threatened. That's what he says, Hillary.
Well, even as ridiculous as that threat might have been, clearly someone that should not have been a police officer from the beginning.
Well, Hillary will disagree on this one. Mr. Shelton, thank you so much for coming in.